seeing these kind of protests, you're making people angry at you. And that is supposed to convince others to join your team.
I keep up with golf. I think 6 protesters came out. They were from
Extinction Rebellion.
Extinction Rebellion.
Their t-shirts that they were wearing said "No golf on a dead planet."
Yeah. 46% of recent EV buyers in the U.S. regret their purchase.
But you know what is going to save the planet?
But
Not having air conditioning for the Olympic athletes in Paris this year. Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian Podcast with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
hello.
Hey there.
Today, our topic is just kind of a general internet roundup for the end of June, which is when we're recording this on the 27th. And I guess I'll start us out. There's been a lot of talk about climate change recently, and a lot of things happening in the climate change arena. Andrew, I think there was something that got under your skin with regards to climate change. You want to open with that?
Well, yes, some, I'm sure, very well-meaning, horrible activists decided that they're going to paint Stonehenge with a bunch of orange powder. That seems to be the latest in a long line of, I don't know.
Idiocy.
Yeah. So, going back several months, there's been, of course, people stringing themselves across roadways or throwing paint on priceless pieces of art.
The Mona Lisa, trying to.
Yes, and now they have resorted to vandalizing priceless human monuments.
Yeah.
And
and the stupid thing, especially to me, is Stonehenge is prehistoric. It's older than the pyramids.
yeah.
It has nothing to do with industrialization at all.
No.
So-
Not even close. And of course they claim, oh, it'll wash right off. It's totally natural.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, there's rare forms of algae that live on the stones that are endangered and will likely be destroyed.
And just, it's 6,000 years old. So we've managed to preserve it for all this time by being careful with it or not knowing where it was.
Right.
So, it's like when you have a cave that's open to tourists, they have to say you cannot touch the stalagmites and stalactites because if you just touch it, nothing really happens. But if you touch it and the next person touches it and 100 people after you that day touch it, then, it doesn't take very long for the stalagmite to break or be worn away. Same thing with Stonehenge. You gotta take care of these things.
I think it's kind of funny as what was the climate like when Stonehenge was first erected?
Yeah, it was warmer.
It was a lot.
And one thing that occurred to me, and I sent this out on X. I tweeted it, even though I guess maybe that's not a thing anymore.
X'd it?
I X'd it. I posted it. Elon, what are these things called now?
Yeah, tweets sounds better, Elon.
Yeah. But I sent out a post about this, and I mentioned that these people don't care about the earth. They just hate humanity.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the case. They just hate themselves and they hate people. And I would not be surprised if they'd be really happy if bunches of people just died.
Well, and if they got what they wanted today, because I think Stonehenge was Just Stop Oil, right?
Yeah, it's Just Stop Oil. That's
so
the group.
If they got what they want today, all use of oil all around the world stopped today, the number of people who would die would be in the millions.
Yeah.
Within a week.
It would be astronomical.
I mean,
and mostly poor people.
Yeah.
Just Stop Oil is a climate cult. We could say it's really religious. It's a death cult, honestly.
Yeah.
And it sees the problem. I mean, it focuses on our fossil fuel that we use to as the main energy source that makes life on Earth as we know it possible.
Well, sorry, keep finishing.
Yeah, and so it attacks that, and I guess they have enough of their adherents who just don't think. I don't know how else to put it, and don't face a logical, rational question as to, well, if your goal, like you said, end oil, what are the real life ramifications for that for life here on Earth? And they don't care. They say, well, it's such emergency to justify all their crazy actions like trying to stop traffic and throwing paint on
the Mona Lisa.
I know. Or what they did to Stonehenge. And you're just sitting there thinking, those are dramatic and they're eye-catching and they get the press, but
it doesn't accomplish anything at all.
You're not making a coherent argument.
Well, one of the things that the takeaway I've gotten from seeing these kind of protests, you're making people angry at you. And that is supposed to convince others to join your team.
Yeah, exactly.
You say, I'm going to make you late for work. I'm going to destroy things that you care about and be a complete just jerk to everybody on purpose.
Yeah.
And then you want me to fall in line with what you believe in because you're doing that.
Right.
How is this going to work? It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Making people angry at you is a terrible way to win friends. It's really terrible.
Yeah.
What was the name of that book?
How to win friends and influence people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They might want to read that one.
They might. Yeah. Dale Carnegie knew a thing or two, and he knew not to tick off everyone you're trying to convince.
Yeah. Generally, a good idea.
But they weren't the only climate crazies that were engaged in this nuttery.
That's exactly right.
Oh, the golf. Yeah.
The travelers over the weekend.
Yeah, you saw that, Thomas.
Yeah, I saw clips of it. I keep up with golf, and so this doesn't usually occur on the golf course, but I think 6 protesters came out. They were from
Extinction Rebellion.
Extinction Rebellion, one of the other crazies, to, protest the use of fossil fuels, basically.
Yeah, their T-shirts that they were wearing said "No golf on a dead planet."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just we've said this before, and we'll say it again. And smarter people than us have said it too. But plants like heat.
Yeah.
Plants like carbon, actually. So the planet's not going to die. All the things that golf courses need, green grass, trees, all that, that's going to be fine. The only danger is to humans, and there's not even a danger to humans.
Yeah. I mean, over the last, since the Industrial Revolution, and even over the last 20 years, they're talking about the greening of the planet because the increased rates of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is
that's what trees breathe.
They need it. And so it's I guess you would say energy rich for the plants. They're growing like crazy because of it.
Yep. And I'll tell you, I've noticed that as I take road trips around here, I've noticed that places when I was little where the trees used to be not blocking some big cliff face or something. Now that cliff face, you can barely tell it's there because all the trees and ivy and all that stuff has grown so much.
Yeah. So,
well, at least we're going to save the planet with electric vehicles, right, Thomas?
Yeah, except nobody wants them.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah. I saw there was a recent survey came out a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
So 46% of recent EV buyers in the U.S. regret their purchase and would like to go back to using gas-powered vehicles.
Yep.
Wow. Did they say why? Did they have like a
the number one issue had to do with range anxiety. You know,
you never know if your gas tank is going to go from 100% to 2% in like an hour.
Yeah. So it was range anxiety, cost. The cost associated with not only buying these expensive vehicles, but I think there's all these, I don't want to say hidden costs, but I'll just put it that way. Costs that are associated with ownership that people aren't expecting necessarily, because you might look at the price tag and it says, oh, it's a $70,000 vehicle. But then there's costs associated with making sure you have the right electrical hookup at your home, which could cost you, I don't know, several $1,000s to make sure you have that set up. And there's higher costs associated with insuring these vehicles. They cost more than a gas powered vehicle. So those kinds of costs that come into it. And if their insurance is so high because the repairs, if you do get even in a minor fender bender, the repairs can be astronomical for these things.
Yeah.
Speaking as someone who spends about maybe $5,000 on a car at most, that just sounds ridiculous to me. I'm going to drive an old clunker until it literally falls apart. Well, if it's got less than 200,000 miles, I don't want it.
I mean, especially in today's economy where our money isn't worth as much because of inflation. And so costs have increased and increased, and people are looking for cheaper ways to live because everything's so expensive. And these are definitely not the cheapest way to live. Yeah. I like to say they're really still remain luxury items for those with means because they're cool tech.
Sure.
Nobody doubts their performance is really cool, but they're impractical.
Yeah. It's the term that my dad always used for stuff like this is bleeding edge technology. It's it's cool tech that will one day be good, but you got to wait until it's no longer bleeding edge. The kinks have been worked out. Some of these problems have been solved. And then it's useful. But if you get on too early, you're going to bleed.
It's one thing if you're forcing everyone living on Martha's Vineyard to buy one.
Yeah.
Because presumably they should be able to afford it.
Yeah. Sure.
But, the vast majority of us are sitting there saying, that might be cool, but I can't afford that thing. And it's not going to get me around with enough confidence that I'll always be able to get where I need to get in the time frame I need to get there.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, speaking of, so part of the issue, as you said, I think, is charging stations.
Yes.
And this is a month-old article, but it's worth mentioning as people are talking about turning in their EVs, basically, for regular gas-powered vehicles. Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, was given $7.5 billion, and the plan was to have 500,000 charging stations built by the end of the decade, so by 2030. And as of May of this year, and he's been doing this for several years so far, 7 or 8 charging stations have been built. Wow. So that's about $1 billion per charging station so far.
Like, Pete, you better enhance that cadence a little bit.
That's for what? An estimated 500,000 charging stations?
Yes.
Yeah. 500,000.
The problem is that unlike a gas station, you can't just pull up to a charging station, plug in for 5 minutes, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes, even the superchargers can still take like an hour.
Oh, yeah. So in order to even make this even remotely close to viable compared to today's standards, the size of these charging stations for people to be able to park their car in for an hour, let's say, to charge up, you're not going to have 8 gas tank or 8 pumps. Mm-hmm. You're going to have 80 of these chargers at these things.
Hello, Tesla Bucky.
I mean, no kidding. It's just going to be.
And that's actually a good point. Bucky's is exploding across the South right now, and it's all gas.
Yeah.
If you want to know where the future is, look at what's actually being successful.
Yeah. I saw a video of a guy who had a plug-in at his house. Of course, those are not as fast as a supercharger.
Yeah.
And he had a Cybertruck, and he was making this satirical video about how awesome they are. Or he plugged it in, and it's like, you too can charge your truck for 16 hours.
Goodness gracious.
So that it can have 40% battery life and go 130 miles.
Oh my gosh. I'll stick with my 20-year-old clunkers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, it's obvious. The majority of Americans are with you on that, Sterling. They're saying, hey, it might be cool. It might be fun to kind of play around with, but it ain't for regular life.
And it's not going to save the planet because the materials it takes to build these things.
You're driving around in a toxic bomb.
Yeah, it is immense.
And the actual, just mining the nickel and all the rare earth metals tears up huge swaths of land to get the metal you need to build these batteries. And then the batteries, once they're used, have to be disposed of safely too.
There's a load on the grid, and there's establishing the infrastructure, and then of course there's the enhanced wear and tear on our infrastructure.
A grid that's going to be powered by renewables, supposedly.
But if you live in a place with a coal-powered grid and you're charging your electric vehicle, you're running on coal power.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see eventually this technology improving to the point of it being viable.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But don't break everything by trying to force it out in front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, what that's going to do, I think, because you're not relying on the natural evolution of a free market economy to be able to meet the needs of an evolving society, you're trying to force feed something, and by doing it, you're actually short circuiting that process of actual organic development that needs to happen with with all the natural kind of fits and starts and failures that are inevitable that are going to happen for technology to develop and work forward to be able to meet the demand of the society at large. If you force the society at large to have to use an inferior product based on this save the planet narrative, you're really impacting negatively the development of society itself.
Yeah. Well, speaking of saving the planet having negative impacts. So EVs, they're not going to save the planet. Throwing dust on Stonehenge. That's not going to save the planet. Paint on the Mona Lisa. None of these are saving the planet. But you know what is going to save the planet?
What?
Not having air conditioning for the Olympic athletes in Paris this year.
Yes.
That'll save the planet because France, they're famous for having terrible energy production. It's all coal. Oh no, it's not coal. It's not oil. It's nuclear. Which has almost no emissions. So why?
Virtue signaling.
Yeah.
Virtue signaling.
So yeah, you would kind of assume, I guess, that reporting on this would frame this as the French being cheapskates, because that's what it sounds like to me. So, but listen to this AP headline, which, as we've told you before, is supposed to be like the standard for independent, non-biased journalism. And just this headline, you may notice why I noticed this headline. U.S. Olympic and other teams will bring their own AC units to Paris, undercutting environmental plan.
Wah, wah, wah.
It's not undercutting it if it's running off nukes.
That's true. And it's also like, well, why would you say it that way? Why wouldn't you say the U.S. is being forced to bring air conditioning so that the Olympic athletes can live in basic standard of living?
Here's the real story, I think. I think this is framed as like, and as we've said, you've mentioned, it's a virtue signal for France. But really what it is for France, it's cost cutting.
Yeah.
They don't have to pay to put air conditionings in all the facilities that they're building, which is going to save them a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And they're fine with other teams bringing in their AC units if they want to.
And one of the other teams doing it, besides the U.S., which is famously, we've kind of flip-flop on how we want to handle environmental stuff every time there's an election. But Germany, they're fully on board, except for when they turn coal plants back on after turning nuclear plants off. But leaving that aside, they're also bringing AC units for their athletes.
Amazing.
Turns out in the Olympics, you want your athletes to be at the top of their game.
Yeah, and part of being at the top of your game is being able to sleep at night.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. On the cardboard beds, because that's what they've got again this year.
Cardboard beds.
It's supposed to be to decrease the amount of wild sex that happens basically in the Olympics. It's not going to work.
I don't know. I think that's another virtue signal. It's just this cost saving measure.
Yeah, exactly. They're just being cheapskates.
You know, I think to your point, Sterling's like, why did they not frame this, or why did they frame this, the AP in question, the way that they did? And it reminds me of an NPR article I heard the other day. Literally, I turned on the radio in the morning and in the night.
Why are you listening to NPR?
That's a good question.
You've got to listen to all the sources, my guys. So I listened to in the beginning and in the evening. Both of them were on climate change, and both of them, they were using language that talked about human created climate change.
Yeah.
That was literally the language. I'm like, you can't prove that. And then also, they're doing all these interviews with people about how this is the hottest summer ever. And it's like, well, have you forgotten about El Nino and the changes of the weather patterns that naturally occur ever so often?
And like, wow, it's in the high 90s in June. Oh man, isn't that shocking?
Well, they always mention like these heat records, but it's always interesting to me that they'll go back there. They'll say this is the hottest in, and then they'll go back 100 years or so, and they said, well, except for this record that was set back in 1923, and you're like, wait a second.
All the records were set in the past 150 years,
right? Because that's as long as we've actually had good reporting on this.
You've been measuring this stuff, and it's just kind of like, yeah, we all have seen these ebbs and flows of temperatures. So some summers are hotter, some summers aren't as hot. And, they keep saying, well, it's going up in heat and everything. And there probably is some increasing, but there's also an increasing number of measurement devices that didn't exist prior to the last couple decades.
And we've mentioned this before, but the ones that have existed for decades have existed in the same places.
Often, yeah.
And so lots of times, and this is true, you can look this up, lots of times they were built out in a field somewhere. And then the city they were based near expanded. And the field is now, surrounded by hundreds of feet of asphalt in every direction. I wonder why it's registering hotter temperatures. Isn't that a surprise?
You know what else should be registering hotter temperatures? That like and subscribe button that you're about to click right now. Make sure that you, if you're on YouTube, hit the bell notification to hear from us right the second we put out a new episode.
Yep.
If you're on any of the streaming services like Spotify. Make sure you follow us, leave us a review, 5-star review, write what you like about it in the comment section. And yeah, keep on supporting what we're doing here, and we'll keep pumping them out.
Yep. All right. Well, getting back to France, there's another story we have in France this year. So because of the Olympics, as every country always does, France is scrambling to clean up their rivers and all the places the athletes are going to be. Every country always does this. In Beijing, they did, they literally seeded clouds to make it rain and stuff like that to lower air pollution. So France is trying to clean up the Seine, which is the river the Olympians are going to be swimming in, at least, I guess, for some of the events. I think a lot of them still take place in pools, but
is it just swimming? There must be some other stuff like rowing and things like that happening.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. But the Seine is not a clean river at the moment. It's not really safe for humans to swim in. And so the Parisians are kind of upset that all this money is now being spent to clean up these things when it hasn't been spent on things they wanted to have been spent on in the past. And it's like, why is it only happening during the Olympics? And so Emmanuel Macron made a promise to swim in the Seine to prove it's safe for the Olympic swimmers. So the Parisians thought they'd be funny, and they thought, because they're French, and what do French people do but protest? They decided to poop in the Seine earlier this week. They had a big day on the 23rd, Poop in the Seine Day.
Pooping Parisians.
Yes.
It sounds like such a French thing to do.
Well, protesting over stupid things is certainly a French thing to do. Pooping in the Seine, yeah, I got to agree with you.
It sounds quite French.
Yeah.
That's just deplorable.
And it's your, like, don't poop or you eat.
Yeah.
It's your river.
Yeah, literally.
Well, I guess the question that comes to my mind is, what is the cause of this pollution in the river that they suddenly now can clean up?
Well, apparently a lot of it is fecal matter.
Do they just normally practice pooping in the river?
Well, I'm guessing the sewer pipes or something. Some of them feed in there.
Or
there's
old sewer systems.
Yeah,
ancient place. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, but Paris has hosted the Olympics at least, one or two other times before, has it not?
I'm sure it has. I don't have that pulled up. I can find out.
It's just interesting to me that, you're right, Sterling, that any host nation will spend money to build facilities and clean up maybe parts of town where they, are going to have a lot more of an international impact of people being there to watch the events. I mean, in 96, I think, for the 96 Olympics in Atlanta, I think Atlanta spent a bunch of money for years, maybe a decade before it even came, building and doing stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And everyone does that. I'm sure Los Angeles is doing stuff to prepare for 2028 already.
You're right. So it is interesting that this is a story now, just weeks before the games.
Yeah. So I'm sure the Olympic athletes are thrilled to hear that there was a big poop in the Seine day before they're going to be swimming in it.
Yeah.
Goodness
this
gracious.
Better be a gold.
Yeah. All right. Well, the other things that are happening on the internet right now, moving away from France, unfortunately, because we love to make fun of them.
Well,
Speaking of other people we love to make fun of, we love to make fun of Disney, because Disney has not been doing terribly well, in our opinion, recently. They've been making a lot of flops as we see them and as the markets seem to see them. Well, we got to admit, Inside Out 2 seems to be a genuine hit. It's their newest big release. It's been out for 13 days. It's already got $799 million made.
Yeah. Disney needed that to prop up all the other garbage.
They certainly did. The reviews are really great. It's like 96% positive from the audience, 91 from the critics. Yeah. So, it's Disney. This is what we kind of expect from Disney. And they're probably not returning to form, but at least every once in a while they can perform at their old level.
I mean, this, as far as an animation, they had some controversial animation recently, movies that just didn't do that great, correct?
They've had a few, yeah.
But this is kind of a going back to the well again, because it's obviously Inside Out 2.
Yeah.
The first one was a big hit.
Yes. But I think this one's looking to do better
Surpass
even than the first one.
Maybe the reason some of these, like Inside Out 2, if it's a genuinely good movie, does this much better is because there's so much subpar stuff coming out that when something that's actually pretty good comes out, it does even better than maybe.
Well, Inside Out also did well.
It did. That's what I'm saying. He said
it made about $858 million, so it's already about to be passed by the sequel, which that makes sense. Sequels are really what has been hitting hard for the past decade or so. It's been the biggest movies have been sequels almost always.
And this is like over a decade in the making, isn't it?
About 9 years
9
since
years.
the last
Okay,
one.
yeah.
It makes sense to me that this topic would be popular across the broad spectrum of people because it really does impact everyone, especially young people today. The whole, well, of course, growing up and the things that you experience growing up, but the mental health stuff is really an issue right now. And a lot of young people are suffering in ways that didn't seem very obvious in years past and might be different now, even than it was in the past for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the movie and you're wondering what Andrew was talking about just there, first movie features a little girl and you go inside her head. And that's why it's Inside Out, because it's the inside of her head. And it's these 5 emotions: anger, joy, sadness, fear, and disgust. And then now in the sequel, as Riley's getting older, we meet a few new emotions. I guess, kind of antagonist, even though it's part of Riley, so it's not evil in the movie, is anxiety, I think. And then there's a couple others. There's ennui, which is boredom in French, and
we can't get away from the French.
No, we can't. We can't get away from the French. They're always coming back.
And the river, and they're still getting in the Disney movies.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, too, I think the reason this is a success is a nostalgia factor as well. Because just think of the kids who grew up, kids who were like maybe 9, 10, 11, 12. When the first one came out, well, now they're 20? And
that makes sense.
Yeah. They're like, oh, yeah, this is my childhood movie that I remember and loved in my childhood. Here's part 2 of it. I can see that's going to be a big draw as well.
Yeah, it's a successful utilization of nostalgia play.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think it shows that a lot of times things benefit from a long time to gestate, a long time to become the new thing.
What they say, absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we just felt obligated to mention that because we're always ragging on Disney, but here they have made a hit.
Yeah, and I think, and I was mentioning it to you off camera, but I think Disney, it's a big corporation. So there's the Disney umbrella, but then it's got these different studios that are underneath it.
Yeah, there's Pixar.
Right. And so this isn't under Lucasfilm. And Lucasfilm is the one right now that everybody's trashing because deservedly so. What it's producing is, and it's an indoctrination center for an ideology that makes movies on the side.
Yeah. So
that's what it's become.
Just for y'all's reference, the things Lucasfilm has made recently is the Star Wars show Acolyte. Andrew and I talked about that a couple weeks ago with the lesbian communist space witches giving birth without the need for men. So yeah, surprisingly, that hasn't been a hit. Yeah. And surprisingly, this Inside Out movie, which is about childhood and family and basic human emotions that everyone has. And that one's doing well. It's shocking.
Yeah. Amazing. It's almost like if you give people what they want, they will watch it.
Yep.
Or something that they can literally relate to versus something that's just
like this edged fringe group of people.
Yeah. There's not that many lesbian communist space witches, even if you leave out the space part. There's just not that many lesbian communist witches compared to the rest of the population anyhow. All right. Well, we did our little mea culpa there. Inside Out has actually been a success, and we hope Disney will continue to return to form and make good movies that do appeal to broad audiences.
Well, this should motivate them.
Yeah, honestly. It should be like, oh, this is what gets results. Maybe we should invest into this kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's our kind of internet roundup for this week. We talked about saving the planet via painting Stonehenge and painting paintings and pooping in the Seine and no air conditioning in the Olympics and, of course, Inside Out, too. And that's what's happening right now. That's what we're seeing anyhow. It's kind of the doldrums of June, but there's a few things happening. This has been the Pop Culture Contrarian Podcast with Thomas Sterling and Andrew. We're brought to you by The Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe both to The Patriot Post and to the Pop Culture Contrarian Podcast. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.